In the bustling, echoing expanse of Grand Central Station, where the early morning light filters through vast windows, casting long shadows across the floor, Michael Thomas, a black CEO dressed sharply in a gray suit, steps off the commuter train from Connecticut. His presence is commanding yet approachable, a reflection of his journey from humble beginnings to the peak of corporate America. Today, he's here not just for routine business, but to finalize a deal that promises to be a cornerstone of his legacy, a massive investment into community-based projects aimed at empowering underprivileged youth. However, before he can take even a dozen strides toward his life-changing meeting, his path takes an unexpected dark turn. Roger Simmons, a security guard with a stocky build and a deeply ingrained suspicion of anyone who doesn't fit his narrow view of propriety, spots Michael. Roger, who prides himself on his vigilance, mistakenly interprets Michael's adjustment of his suit jacket as an attempt to secret away a luxury watch from one of the station's high-end boutiques. Fueled by a mix of misplaced duty and inherent bias, Roger decides in that split second that he's caught a criminal in the act. "Stop, thief!" Roger bellows, his voice ricocheting off the stone and glass, slicing through the murmur of morning commuters and drawing startled looks from dozens of bystanders. The accusation slices through the air, turning heads and pulling out smartphones, as the age of instant judgment and digital voyeurism kicks in. Michael stops in his tracks, his heart pounding, his face a mask of disbelief and slowly mounting outrage. He turns slowly to face Roger, his eyes locking on the guard with a calm intensity that belies his shock. Roger marches toward Michael, his hand resting on the handcuffs at his belt, his steps heavy with the weight of authority he's all too ready to misuse. "I saw you take that watch. Don't think you can just walk away," he accuses, pointing a rigid finger at Michael, who now stands surrounded by a growing crowd of onlookers. Michael, whose life has been a testament to integrity and hard work, finds himself at the center of a humiliating and infuriating public spectacle. "I haven't stolen anything," he responds, his voice steady but loud enough to carry. "Check the security cameras and you'll see. You're making a mistake." But Roger is undeterred, his mind closed to the possibility of error. The confrontation escalates as Michael insists on his innocence, and Roger, driven by a toxic mix of pride and prejudice, prepares to escalate the situation into an arrest. This incident, ignited by a wrongful accusation, sets off a chain of events that will not only expose the fissures in the lives of both men, but also serve as a stark reminder of the power of biases left unchecked. As the drama unfolds, it promises a narrative steeped in tension, misunderstanding, and the quest for vindication and justice, ensuring that by the end of the day, one man's career is irreversibly over. Roger Simmons was born in 1972 in the town of Edgefield, Pennsylvania, a place that echoed with the iron clang of its steel mills and the no-nonsense ethos of its blue-collar roots. His father, Harold Simmons, was a decorated police officer who held a reputation for being firm but fair, and his mother, Margaret, was a schoolteacher known for her strict yet nurturing approach. The Simmons household was defined by a deep sense of duty, discipline, and unwavering adherence to rules. Growing up, Roger was immersed in an environment where respect for authority was paramount. Harold often recounted stories from his time on the force, tales steeped in the belief that the thin blue line was all that stood between order and chaos. Margaret, while less vocal about her opinions, underscored this sentiment through her teaching and parenting, ensuring that her children understood the importance of integrity, discipline, and moral absolutism. For Roger, these lessons became the foundation of his worldview, shaping him into a boy who saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. As a child, Roger's inclination toward order manifested in his behavior. While other children pushed boundaries, Roger upheld them, playing the role of the enforcer even among his friends. He took pride in being trusted by teachers to maintain control in the classroom when they left and volunteered to monitor hallways during school events. While these traits earned him the praise of adults, they isolated him from his peers, who saw him as rigid and unforgiving. The local community of Edgefield, like many small towns of its era, was grappling with the economic downturns that came with the decline of the steel industry. Crime rates rose, and tensions simmered as jobs disappeared and livelihoods were threatened. Harold Simmons became a beacon of law and order, leading high-profile arrests and cracking down on what he viewed as growing lawlessness. Roger idolized his father, seeing him as the embodiment of justice. Harold's stories, whether they involved arresting a local troublemaker or maintaining peace during a particularly heated protest, reinforced Roger's belief that strength and discipline were the cornerstones of society. Roger's teenage years were marked by involvement in programs that aligned with his structured nature. He was a standout in the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, JROTC, where he thrived on the discipline, camaraderie, and leadership opportunities it offered. His instructors noted his ability to command respect and maintain order, qualities that set him apart from others. He carried this same sense of discipline to the football field, where he played linebacker with the same calculated intensity that he approached everything else in life. However, while his coaches admired his dedication, his teammates sometimes bristled at his harsh criticism and strict expectations. After high school, Roger's path was clear. He joined the local police academy, eager to follow in his father's footsteps and bring his black and white worldview to a larger stage. At the academy, he was a standout recruit, sharp, focused, and unyielding in his adherence to protocol. Instructors praised him for his discipline and his ability to handle stressful situations without flinching. However, even here, his rigidity drew mixed reactions. While some saw him as a promising officer, others noted that his inflexible nature could be a liability in more nuanced, real-world scenarios. Roger's first years as a police officer were marked by early successes. He quickly developed a reputation as a dedicated officer who never cut corners and always enforced the law to its fullest extent. His colleagues respected his commitment, but some found his unyielding approach difficult, especially when dealing with the community. Roger's worldview left little room for empathy or understanding. He believed firmly in a justice system that rewarded the good and punished the bad, with no exceptions. To him, bending rules was akin to inviting chaos, a belief deeply rooted in the lessons from his childhood and reinforced by the stories of his father. Despite his rigid ways, Roger climbed the ranks. His record was filled with commendations for drug busts, burglary deterrence, and several arrests where he was credited for maintaining peace. Yet, along with the accolades came whispers of his overbearing demeanor. The community he served grew increasingly wary of his presence, viewing him as a symbol of excessive enforcement rather than a protector. This friction came to a head when Roger was involved in an incident that changed the trajectory of his career. Responding to a report of a suspected armed robbery, Roger, acting on instinct and with his typical no-nonsense approach, used force to detain a young man whom he believed to be reaching for a weapon. The man was later found to be unarmed, and the event, caught on camera by a bystander, sparked outrage. The footage showed Roger's hardline methods in stark relief, contrasting sharply with the more community-focused approach the department was advocating. The fallout was swift and severe. Protests erupted, calling for changes in policing and accountability. Roger was suspended pending an investigation, a move that shook him to his core. He had never seen himself as anything but a protector, but now he was painted as an aggressor, a symbol of everything wrong with modern policing. The suspension forced Roger into a period of reflection, one that was as uncomfortable as it was uncharted. For the first time, he questioned the principles that had guided him his entire life. The internal investigation cleared Roger of criminal wrongdoing, citing procedural adherence, but the damage was done. His return to the force was marked by tension and a palpable change in the way his peers and the community viewed him. The department, facing public pressure, subtly encouraged Roger to take an early retirement. Disillusioned and feeling betrayed by an institution he had devoted his life to, Roger left the force and retreated into isolation. Needing work and craving the familiar structure of enforcement, Roger found a job as a security officer at Grand Central Terminal. The role was different from policing but still allowed him to maintain a sense of authority and control. In this new environment, Roger applied the same principles that had both defined and haunted his career: strict adherence to rules, an eye for suspicion, and a relentless pursuit of order. The bustling, chaotic nature of the terminal was both a challenge and a balm, distracting him from the turmoil that had marked the end of his time on the force. Yet old habits die hard. Roger's interactions with the diverse, hurried crowds of New York City were marked by the same unyielding scrutiny. He viewed people not as individuals, but as potential disruptors to the peace he worked so hard to maintain. It was during one of these days that he encountered Michael Thomas, a successful black CEO, who Roger misjudged in a moment steeped in bias and reflexive judgment. The confrontation that followed, sparked by a misinterpretation of Michael's actions, unraveled quickly. A video of Roger confronting Michael, with accusations made in a voice carrying decades of ingrained authority and prejudice, went viral. The backlash was immediate and fierce, catapulting Roger into the center of yet another public firestorm. This time, there was no department to shield him, no uniform to validate his actions. He was a man exposed, forced to confront the reality that the very principles he had held as unassailable were, in fact, flawed. The consequences were profound, leading Roger to confront not only public judgment but his own internal reckoning. This time, the process of reflection was deeper, more personal. He attended workshops on implicit bias, spoke with community leaders who challenged him to see beyond the black and white views of his youth, and began to understand that justice was not solely about enforcement, but about understanding, compassion, and growth. Roger's journey toward redemption was slow, marked by moments of resistance and breakthroughs. He began volunteering with youth programs that emphasized community building and mentorship, using his experiences as cautionary tales. Through these acts, he gradually rebuilt trust, not just with those around him, but with himself. Roger Simmons walked his usual route through the bustling corridors of Grand Central Terminal, his eyes scanning the crowd with practiced precision. The morning rush had just begun, and waves of commuters surged through the space like clockwork. Students with backpacks slung over their shoulders, businessmen with briefcases, and tourists pausing in awe of the terminal's grandeur. To most people, the chaotic hum was the rhythm of the city. To Roger, it was a reminder of potential threats. He prided himself on spotting those who might disrupt the fragile order he maintained with an iron fist. Today, like every other day, Roger's uniform was crisp, his gaze unyielding. He moved with the precision of a soldier on patrol, his senses attuned to anything that seemed even slightly out of place. He mentally cataloged each person who walked by, assessing them with a quick, silent judgment. Years on the police force had sharpened this instinct, and though it was now employed in the less official role of a security guard, Roger approached the job with the same unwavering seriousness. His career may have changed, but his principles had not. He reached the end of the main hall and turned to face a row of boutique stores that lined one side of the terminal. His eyes fell on a man standing near the entrance of a high-end watch shop, adjusting something inside his jacket. Roger's brows furrowed as a flicker of suspicion sparked within him. The man was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, but there was something about him that didn't fit the usual image Roger associated with the customers of that store. He was a tall black man with a confident demeanor, his phone balanced in one hand as he glanced at his watch. The voice of Roger's father echoed in his head, a reminder of lessons that have become mantras. Asterisk, stay vigilant. Look beyond what's obvious, asterisk. These words had kept him sharp and, in his view, had justified countless decisions over the years. As he observed the man, a narrative began to form in his mind, fed by biases he did not question. Asterisk, a distraction. A quick grab. Asterisk, the possibilities fueled his instinct to act. Roger's hand moved unconsciously to the radio clipped on his shoulder, his fingers brushing the button but not pressing it yet. He studied the scene for another few moments, the weight of his judgment tipping further into certainty. He began walking toward the man, every step deliberate, each one tightening the knot of tension in the air. The sounds of the terminal, the laughter, conversations, and announcements seemed to fade as Roger focused on the singular task at hand. The man, Michael Thomas, glanced up as Roger approached, sensing the shift in energy. Roger's eyes met Michael's, and for a brief moment, the two stared at each other across a gulf of misunderstanding and presumption. Roger took note of the slight crease in Michael's brow, a flicker of confusion that Roger interpreted as the awareness of being caught. In reality, it was the innocent look of someone suddenly scrutinized without reason. "Sir, can I speak with you for a moment?" Roger's voice was controlled, professional, but edged with an authority that brooked no refusal. Michael paused, his phone slipping into his pocket as he turned fully to face Roger. Is there a problem? Michael's tone was calm but curious, his eyes searching Roger's face for answers. Roger's heartbeat quickened, adrenaline coursing through him as he stepped closer. He could feel the weight of the terminal's collective gaze slowly pivoting in their direction. He was aware of the onlookers' subtle shift, the ripple of curiosity that began to move through the crowd like an electric current. "I'd like to ask you a few questions," Roger said, his posture rigid and unyielding. Michael's expression changed, confusion giving way to a guarded look. "About what?" he asked, maintaining his composure despite the sudden, unwarranted attention. Roger hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mind racing to reconcile his hunch with the reality of the situation. He had no concrete evidence, no alarm had gone off, and no store clerk had signaled distress. Yet his instincts, honed by years of patrolling neighborhoods and terminal halls, screamed that something was amiss. "Is there a reason you were adjusting your jacket near that store?" Roger's question was pointed, laden with an accusation that Michael immediately recognized. A murmur passed through the bystanders who had stopped, phones now appearing in their hands as they recorded the interaction. Michael's jaw clenched, a subtle response to the insult wrapped in Roger's question. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but I was just checking the time," Michael said, extending his arm to reveal the watch on his wrist, a piece that gleamed with an understated elegance. The simple gesture was proof of innocence, but to Roger, it was a challenge. Roger's eyes narrowed, doubt battling with the certainty that had driven him to this moment. His training dictated that he stand his ground, that he pursue every suspicion to its end, but something in Michael's steady gaze pierced the haze of Roger's assumptions. For the first time in a long while, an unease began to stir, whispering that this moment was slipping from his control. The tension coiled tighter, suffocating the space between them. Roger felt the crowd's silent judgment pressing against his back, and the slight tremor in his hand betrayed his internal conflict. But before he could decide his next move, the shrill sound of an alert buzzed from his radio, breaking the spell. The noise, loud and sudden, caused a few onlookers to jump, their phones capturing the scene as a moment frozen in tension. Michael's eyes flickered to the source of the noise, and Roger saw a flash of disbelief cross his face. The moment stretched out, heavy with implication, and Roger knew instinctively that he had reached a precipice. One more step, one more word, and the situation would tip irreversibly in a direction that he could neither predict nor control. Michael Thomas was a man who carried the weight of ambition and resilience in every step. At 39, he had carved out a path few could imagine, rising from humble beginnings in a modest neighborhood in Detroit to the towering glass offices of one of New York's most prestigious investment firms. As a black CEO in an industry where diversity was often more an aspiration than a reality, Michael's presence was a testament to his grit, intelligence, and unwavering belief in his potential. Yet, despite all his success, he remained grounded, never losing touch with the people and values that had shaped him. Growing up, Michael had been raised by a single mother, Clara Thomas, who worked tirelessly as a nurse and still managed to make every school play, every parent-teacher meeting, and every tough conversation count. She was the embodiment of strength wrapped in kindness, and her sacrifices instilled in Michael a drive to excel, not just for himself, but for the community that nurtured him. He learned from her that true success was measured not only in accolades, but in how you carried yourself in the face of adversity. Those lessons stayed with Michael as he navigated the cutthroat corridors of the finance world. Despite being underestimated countless times, he met each challenge with quiet determination. He wasn't one for loud displays. His power was in his precision, his ability to stay composed and maintain a sense of integrity that earned him respect from those who knew him. But even the most steadfast spirits are not immune to the shock of injustice when it is thrust upon them unexpectedly. On that fateful morning in Grand Central Terminal, Michael had arrived early to prepare for a meeting that could redefine his company's future. He was dressed impeccably, as always, in a tailored navy blue suit with subtle pinstripes, the cuffs of his crisp white shirt peeking out just so from under his jacket sleeves. He wore a watch that had once belonged to his grandfather, a modest but cherished timepiece that represented years of quiet fortitude. Its gold face glinted under the station's lights as Michael checked the time, ensuring he wasn't cutting it too close. As he shifted the sleeve of his jacket and adjusted the strap, he caught a glimpse of the station's daily hum around him. There was an air of anticipation in the crowd, with travelers rushing, families reuniting, and the occasional busker playing a hopeful tune. In that brief moment, Michael felt a sense of peace amidst the city's chaos. It reminded him of why he worked so hard, to contribute to this world, to thrive in it, and to make a difference. But that serenity shattered when a uniformed man approached him with an expression that immediately set his nerves on edge. The guard's eyes wore a look Michael knew too well, a look that spoke of suspicion, authority, and unearned judgment. The sudden shift in the atmosphere was palpable, like an electric charge running through the air. "Sir, can I speak with you for a moment?" The guard's voice was controlled, but Michael detected the subtle edge that hinted at something more than a routine question. His heart skipped a beat as the noise of the terminal seemed to fade around him, replaced by a quiet thrum of disbelief. He turned to fully face the guard, Roger Simmons, meeting his gaze with a calm that belied the tension building inside him. "Is there a problem?" Michael asked, his voice even but tight. He could feel eyes beginning to settle on them, strangers pausing in their rush to witness the unfolding scene. The warmth of the terminal now felt cold and intrusive, the space around him narrowing as the guard's stance became more imposing. Roger's question came next, one that cut through Michael's composure like a knife. "Is there a reason you were adjusting your jacket near that store?" The accusation was subtle but unmistakable, each word dripping with a presumption that turned the mundane act of checking a watch into a point of suspicion. For a moment, Michael was struck silent, his mind racing through a mix of incredulity, frustration, and a familiar pang of vulnerability that he had worked so hard to keep buried beneath layers of success and self-assuredness. This was not a boardroom where he held sway, nor was it an encounter with peers who knew his worth. This was raw, exposed, and unfair, a moment when decades of achievements were reduced to an unfounded assumption. His eyes met Roger's again, and for an instant, he saw not just a security guard, but a man who represented every barrier he had faced and overcome, now personified in this singular, tense moment. Michael forced himself to breathe, to maintain his dignity even as the injustice of the situation wrapped around him like a vise. He responded slowly and clearly, "I was just checking the time." Michael's calm explanation did nothing to ease the suspicion in Roger's eyes. Instead, the guard's posture stiffened, as though Michael's composed demeanor was an affront, a challenge to his authority. The crowd around them thickened, phones raised subtly as curiosity turned to interest, then to silent judgment. Michael's chest tightened, not with fear but with a deep frustration that this, despite everything he had achieved, was still happening. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but here he was, standing accused without evidence, his integrity called into question in front of strangers whose glances were now filled with whispers of doubt. The situation weighed heavily on him, every second dragging on like hours. He glanced briefly at the watch on his wrist, the watch that had survived his grandfather's hardest days and his own climb from Detroit to Manhattan. Its silent ticking was a reminder of resilience, of the power to endure. But in that moment, it felt like a cruel echo of time spent defending his worth in a world that too often saw him first as a suspect. A wave of quiet rage mixed with exhaustion washed over him, but he swallowed it down, refusing to let it break through the surface. He met Roger's gaze one last time, eyes steady, and spoke with a voice that carried all the weight of his years. "I've done nothing wrong. You're making a mistake." Hey everyone, if this story has you on the edge of your seat, take a moment to share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an incident where assumptions led to an unfair outcome? Comment below. I'd love to hear your stories and perspectives. And if this narrative resonates with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden truths behind real-life encounters. Your engagement helps us share these powerful stories with more people. Thanks for watching and being part of this conversation. Roger Simmons stood in the quiet of his dimly lit apartment, the noise of Grand Central Terminal now just a memory echoing in his mind. The confrontation with Michael Thomas replayed over and over, each frame dissected by the countless news reports and social media posts that now followed him like a shadow. He had prided himself on being vigilant, a guardian of order in a chaotic world. Yet now, that pride had morphed into something far less reassuring, doubt and the first prickles of shame. It started subtly. The morning after the incident, Roger awoke to the persistent buzzing of his phone. He rubbed his eyes, squinting at the notifications flooding the screen. Each alert brought news articles with headlines like racial profiling or duty. Security guard sparks outrage and CEO confronted without cause at Grand Central. His face stared back at him from videos that had been shared and reshared thousands of times, showing the tense moment he questioned Michael Thomas. The comment sections were ablaze with anger, dissecting his motives, scrutinizing his judgment, and condemning his actions. Roger's first response was disbelief mixed with indignation. He had done what he believed was right, hadn't he? He had acted on instinct, following the training and principles instilled in him over decades. But that defense rang hollow even as he thought it, particularly when he read the quieter, more pointed comments. This isn't just about him. It's about all of us who are treated as suspects first. The knock at his door came that afternoon. It was Carla Martinez, his superior and the head of station security. Her face was drawn, her mouth set in a hard line. Without preamble, she handed him a letter. "Roger, this is serious. The company is putting you on administrative leave pending an investigation." Roger's mouth opened, then closed. Words failed him as he glanced down at the formal, unforgiving text. Administrative leave, the phrase looped in his mind, cold and impersonal. "Carla, I was doing my job. You know me," he managed to say, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Carla's eyes softened for a moment, but she quickly returned to her professional demeanor. "I do know you, Roger, and I know that you don't see how serious this is yet. But trust me, it's not going to go away because you think you were right." The silence after she left was deafening. Roger sat down, the creak of the old chair beneath him magnified in the stillness. Administrative leave wasn't just a formality. It was the beginning of a reckoning. As the day turned to night, he scrolled through the news on his phone. Protesters had already gathered outside the station, their signs bright against the dull stone of the terminal. "End profiling now. Justice for all. And no more silence." Reporters interviewed commuters who described their fears of being unjustly targeted, their words landing like accusations in Roger's chest. The following day brought the next wave of consequences. An email arrived, its tone as harsh as the decision it conveyed. The station had concluded its preliminary findings. Procedural errors, failure to adhere to unbiased practices, and, most damningly, a pattern of behavior suggesting Roger's judgments were clouded by bias. The weight of that last phrase, pattern of behavior, settled in his gut like a stone. The community response was swift and brutal. News outlets ran stories that delved into Roger's past, unearthing complaints from previous positions that had long been buried in paperwork. Former colleagues appeared on talk shows, some defending him, others subtly implying that this wasn't the first time Roger's instincts had strayed too far. One particular interview stood out. Alan Rivera, an ex-colleague turned community liaison, spoke with measured words. Roger was always committed, but there was a rigidity to his thinking that could be dangerous. This incident was the culmination of that. Hearing Alan's words was like a punch to the stomach. They had worked side by side for years, and while Roger remembered their professional disagreements, he never thought Alan saw him as dangerous. The echo of that word haunted him as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The next few days brought more than sleepless nights. Roger's daughter, Sophie, called him. Her voice, usually warm, was strained. "Dad, everyone's talking about what happened. People at school are sharing the video, and I don't know what to say." "Sophie," he began, the words coming out choked, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "I know you think you were doing the right thing," she said softly, "but Dad, don't you see? This is bigger than that. It's not just about that moment. It's about everything that led to it." The call ended, leaving Roger staring at the darkened phone screen. His daughter's words reverberated in his mind, challenging him in a way that no headline or protest had managed to do. The certainty he had clung to began to fray at the edges. As the investigation dragged on, Roger's world shrank. Friends stopped calling, neighbors avoided him, and the isolation felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. One afternoon, as he picked up his mail, he found an anonymous letter among the bills and flyers. It read simply, "Now do you see us?" The words felt accusatory, but also a plea. They lingered with him as he shut the door and sat down, the paper still clutched in his hand. The final straw came when Michael Thomas gave a public statement. The CEO, composed and articulate, spoke not of anger but of disappointment. We should all be able to walk into a public space without fear of being seen as a suspect because of who we are, he said. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has experienced this silent judgment, who has been questioned when they did nothing wrong. Watching Michael's statement, Roger felt the last of his defenses crumble. The guilt that had been gnawing at him swelled into a tidal wave. The room seemed to close in, suffocating him with the reality that he had contributed to the very thing Michael spoke of, a culture of silent judgment and unquestioned bias. The station formally terminated Roger's employment a week later. The letter, printed on official letterhead, was terse and unfeeling. He was advised to attend workshops on implicit bias and community relations if he wanted to work in security or law enforcement again. The words blurred as he read them. Tears he hadn't realized were forming clouding his vision. Desperate for answers and a path forward, Roger accepted an invitation from the community center to attend a workshop on bias awareness. He walked into the room, feeling the eyes of those who recognized him. Marcus Brooks, the facilitator and a former police officer, began the session with a statement that pierced Roger's core. Recognizing our biases doesn't make us weak, ignoring them does. Stories followed, each one striking Roger harder than the last. People shared experiences of being followed in stores, pulled over without cause, and questioned simply for existing in spaces others deemed they didn't belong. A middle-aged woman described the pain of seeing her teenage son come home, eyes red, after being unfairly questioned by security at a mall. Roger saw himself in those stories, not as a protector, but as the source of the pain these people had experienced. Marcus approached Roger during a break. "I know why you're here," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "It's hard to face it, but this is where change starts." Roger nodded, unable to find his voice. He felt exposed, raw, but for the first time, he'd also felt the stirrings of understanding. The rest of the workshop passed in a haze of uncomfortable realizations and moments of clarity. By the end of the day, Roger was drained, but the guilt had transformed into a determination to do better. The journey didn't end there. Roger attended more workshops, met with community leaders, and volunteered to speak at forums about bias in security and policing. Each session, each conversation, chipped away at the rigid mindset that had once defined him. He began to read books on history and systemic inequality, realizing just how blind he had been to the broader context of his actions. Months later, Roger reached out to Michael Thomas. He wasn't sure what he expected, a refusal, maybe silence, but Michael agreed to meet. The conversation was brief but powerful. Roger apologized, not just for the incident, but for the years of unchecked behavior that had led to it. Michael listened, his face unreadable until he finally said, "Acknowledging it is a start. What matters is what you do next." Roger left that meeting with a sense of purpose. The consequences of his actions had been painful, but they had also opened a door to transformation. He began collaborating with community organizations to develop training programs for security personnel, sharing his story as a cautionary tale of what happens when one fails to question their biases. The man who once patrolled Grand Central with unyielding authority was now someone who listened more than he spoke, who sought to understand before judging. The journey was ongoing, marked by moments of regret but also hope. Roger Simmons had faced the harsh consequences of his actions, but in doing so, he had found the opportunity to rebuild not just his career, but himself. Roger Simmons stood at the community center's entrance, the morning sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. The chill in the air was biting, but it paled in comparison to the cold pit that had settled in his stomach. It had been weeks since his termination from Grand Central Terminal, weeks filled with sleepless nights and the constant thrum of public scrutiny. He wasn't sure what had compelled him to come to the center that day. Perhaps it was the gnawing guilt or the realization that doing nothing was no longer an option. Either way, he was there, ready to face whatever came next. The community center was buzzing with activity. Volunteers bustled around setting up tables for an upcoming food drive, their chatter blending with the sounds of children playing in a nearby room. Roger's eyes scanned the room nervously until he spotted Marcus Brooks, the former police officer turned community leader who had been facilitating the workshops Roger attended. Marcus noticed him and walked over, extending a hand. "Good to see you, Roger," Marcus said, his voice calm but assessing. You're here early? Roger swallowed, the knot in his throat tightening. I wanted to help. I need to do more than just show up to workshops and listen. Marcus studied him for a moment before nodding. All right, we're setting up for the food drive. Let's put you to work. The day passed in a blur of tasks. Roger hauled boxes of food, organized supplies, and directed volunteers. It felt good to move, to work with his hands, and to be part of something that wasn't solely focused on him and his mistakes. As the hours wore on, he noticed people casting glances his way, some curious, others wary. He couldn't blame them. His face had been plastered across the news, tied to an incident that had sparked citywide outrage. But here he was, trying to find his way forward, one step at a time. Toward the end of the day, a young woman named Claire approached him. She had been at the workshops and had shared her story about being followed in a store by security. Roger remembered her words vividly, how she described the humiliation and anger that simmered beneath her composed exterior. "Hey, Roger," she said, offering a small smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, I didn't expect to be here either," Roger admitted, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But I needed to do more." Claire nodded, her expression softening. "People are noticing. It takes a lot to show up and keep showing up." Her words stayed with Roger long after the day ended. They were simple but significant. For years, he had prided himself on his work, on being vigilant and firm. Now, he realized that real strength was showing up, not to assert control, but to contribute and learn. Over the next few weeks, Roger made the community center a second home. He attended every event he could, mentorship programs, outreach events, food distributions, and workshops. Each day presented a new challenge and a new opportunity for growth. He listened to stories from people whose lives mirrored those he had once scrutinized with suspicion. He met young men and women who shared how they felt living under the weight of constant judgment and learned how that weight shaped their choices, their aspirations, and their sense of belonging. One afternoon, Marcus pulled Roger aside after a youth mentorship session. "You're making a difference here, Roger," Marcus said, his eyes serious but warm. "But this isn't just about showing up. It's about understanding why you're here and what you want to change, not just for others, but for yourself." Roger nodded, the weight of Marcus's words settling deep in his chest. "I want to make things right," he said, the sincerity in his voice palpable. "I want to understand how I got to where I was, how I let myself become someone who could make the choices I did." Marcus's gaze softened. "That's a hard question to face, but it's the right one. Keep asking it, and you'll find your answers." The turning point came during a session called Stories We Carry. Participants were encouraged to share moments when they felt unseen or unjustly judged. Roger sat at the back of the circle, listening as a teenage boy named Jamal spoke. Jamal's voice trembled as he recounted being stopped by security at a mall, accused of theft simply because he lingered too long at a display. The humiliation had stayed with him, shaping how he moved through the world, always cautious, always on edge. Roger felt a familiar knot in his stomach as he listened, guilt threading through his conscience. When it was his turn, he hesitated, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing on him. "I used to be the person who made people feel that way," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping people safe. But I see now that I was blind to the harm I was causing, and I'm sorry for that." The room was silent, the only sound the hum of the heating vent overhead. Jamal met Roger's eyes, surprise and something like understanding flickering across his face. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. For Roger, that was enough for now. In the months that followed, Roger deepened his commitment. He joined Marcus and other community leaders in developing training programs for security personnel and law enforcement, drawing on his own experiences to highlight the importance of empathy and unbiased practices. He became a voice of advocacy, speaking at public forums and engaging in discussions that challenged his old beliefs. Each speech was a blend of confession and hope, where he admitted his past mistakes and shared how he was working to change. One evening, Roger was invited to speak at a town hall meeting that included activists, city officials, and community members. The room was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Roger stood at the podium, the paper in his hand trembling slightly. He took a deep breath and began. "I was once a man who thought that following the rules was enough, that vigilance and enforcement were all that mattered. But I learned the hard way that without empathy, without understanding, those rules become weapons. They don't protect, they harm. And for that, I am deeply sorry. But I'm here because I want to be part of a new way forward, one that values people over suspicion. The room was quiet as his words settled. Then, from the back, someone clapped. The sound was joined by another, and soon, the room filled with applause, not thunderous, but steady. Roger's eyes searched the room and found Michael Thomas, who had come at Marcus's invitation. Michael's expression was unreadable, but he nodded once, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. After the meeting, Michael approached Roger. The tension between them had lessened over time, but it still lingered like an unspoken question. I appreciate what you said tonight, Michael began, his voice measured. It's not easy to stand up and admit when you were wrong. It's not, Roger agreed, the weight of the statement pressing down on him. But it's necessary. Michael's expression softened. Keep doing the work, Roger. Words are important, but actions are what change things. Roger nodded, the words resonating in him long after the meeting ended. He knew that redemption wasn't a one-time event. It was an ongoing process, a daily choice to do better. The next day, he met with Marcus and a group of community leaders to plan a series of workshops for local businesses on implicit bias and customer engagement. It was a project that would take months, but Roger was committed. Each meeting, each training, and each story shared was a reminder of why he was there and how far he had come. One of the most humbling moments in Roger's journey came when he volunteered at a youth center, working with teenagers who had been through the juvenile justice system. He met a young man named Rashad, who had a defiant glint in his eyes and a chip on his shoulder the size of the city. Rashad reminded Roger of the countless young men he had once approached with suspicion. But now, Roger approached him differently. Over weeks of tutoring sessions and basketball games in the center's small gym, Roger and Rashad began to build a rapport. One afternoon, Rashad asked, "Why are you even here? Don't guys like you usually just look at us like we're up to no good?" Roger's chest tightened at the question, but he answered honestly. "I used to be that guy," he admitted. "But I'm here because I know I was wrong, and I want to be better. I want to help you and others see that not everyone in a uniform is your enemy." Rashad studied him for a moment before shrugging. "I guess we'll see," he said, but his tone was less hostile than before. It was a small step, but Roger felt its significance. As the months turned into a year, Roger's name slowly became synonymous, not just with the incident at Grand Central, but with growth and change. The local newspaper featured a story titled "From Enforcer to Advocate: One Man's Journey to Redemption." It highlighted his work in the community, his speeches, and the training programs that had been implemented in several local businesses and public institutions. But Roger knew that headlines didn't mark the end of his journey. Redemption was not a finish line. It was a path that required constant attention, humility, and effort. The man who once patrolled the halls of Grand Central with unwavering authority now walked those same streets with a different purpose: to connect, to teach, and to learn. He became a mentor to younger security personnel, sharing his story as a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of change. On the anniversary of the incident, Roger attended a community event held at the park. It was a celebration of progress and a reminder of the work still to be done. Marcus invited Roger to speak, and as he stepped onto the stage, he saw familiar faces in the crowd: Clara, Jamal, Rashad, and even Michael Thomas, standing near the back with a subtle nod of approval. Roger took a deep breath, the evening breeze cool against his skin. "A year ago, I stood on the other side of understanding," he began. "I thought I knew what was right, but I was wrong. Today, I stand before you not as a man who has it all figured out, but as someone committed to learning, to changing, and to making sure that no one else feels unseen or unheard." The applause that followed was warm and sustained, a sign that while forgiveness and trust took time, they were not impossible. Roger stepped down from the stage with a heart full of gratitude and determination. His journey was ongoing, marked by the lessons he continued to learn and the lives he hoped to touch. And in that moment, he knew that true redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a better future, one day at a time. Roger Simmons stood at the entrance of the newly renovated community center, the warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk, casting a soft glow on the group of people gathered for the evening's event. It was the grand reopening of the center, now expanded to include mentorship programs, workshops, and spaces dedicated to fostering dialogue and understanding. The past year had been long and difficult, marked by countless moments of doubt and hard-won realizations. But tonight, it felt as if a new chapter was beginning. The air buzzed with laughter and conversations as members of the community filled the main hall. Children darted through the crowd, their giggles weaving through the hum of the evening, while parents exchanged smiles and greetings. Roger stood at the edge of the room, taking it all in. The hall was decorated with photos of volunteers and participants, moments captured during food drives, workshops, and community projects, many of which Roger had been a part of. A familiar voice cut through his reverie. "Roger, you made it." Marcus Brooks approached, his smile wide and welcoming. The two men shook hands, a gesture that had grown more significant over time. Marcus had been Roger's mentor guide and sometimes the voice that challenged him the most during his journey. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Roger said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. It had been a long time since he felt this sense of belonging. As the evening unfolded, speeches were made, stories shared, and plans for future community projects discussed. Roger watched as people who had once looked at him with distrust now nodded and waved in acknowledgement. The journey hadn't been easy, but he had worked tirelessly to earn that trust through volunteering, mentorship, and an unyielding commitment to listening and learning. Midway through the event, Marcus stepped onto the small stage set up at the front of the hall. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating what we've accomplished as a community," he began, his deep voice commanding the attention of the room. "It's about recognizing the people who have helped us get here, sometimes in unexpected ways." There was a murmur of agreement as Marcus continued. One person, in particular, had shown us that change is possible when we commit to it, even when it's hard. "Roger Simmons, could you come up here for a moment?" Roger's breath caught in his chest. He hadn't expected this. The room turned toward him, and for a second, he felt the weight of those collective gazes. But they weren't cold or judgmental this time. They were warm, curious, and supportive. He stepped forward, the noise of the crowd softening to a gentle silence. Marcus reached out and placed a hand on Roger's shoulder. Over the past year, Roger has shown that redemption is not just about saying you're sorry. It's about putting in the work every day to make things right. He's been at the forefront of our mentorship programs, helping guide the next generation, and he's played a pivotal role in our training workshops that teach empathy and fairness. He's been an example of what it means to face your past and choose a better path. The room erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but genuine, heartfelt clapping that made Roger's throat tighten. He looked out at the faces in the crowd. Clara, who had once shared her painful experiences, but now stood with a proud smile. Jamal, who gave him a thumbs up from across the room, and even Rashad, who nodded with a knowing smirk. Roger took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you," he started, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "When I first walked into this center, I wasn't sure where I belonged or if I even deserved to be here. But you all taught me that it's never too late to change, to learn, and to try to make amends. I want to thank Marcus, this community, and everyone who gave me the chance to do better." There was a pause as Roger scanned the room, his eyes landing on Michael Thomas, who stood near the back. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Roger saw a slight nod, a sign of acknowledgement, acceptance, and perhaps even forgiveness. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it spoke volumes. Roger's chest felt lighter than it had in years as he stepped back from the microphone. Marcus clapped him on the back, and the applause rose again, this time mingled with cheers. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes, conversations, and shared memories. As the night wound down, Michael approached Roger, a quiet smile on his face. "You've done good work, Roger," he said, extending his hand. Roger shook it, the gesture simple but profound. "I had a lot to learn," Roger admitted, the weight of the past year behind those words. "We all do," Michael said. "The difference is in how we respond when we're shown the truth." They exchanged a look of mutual respect before Michael turned back to join the others, leaving Roger with a sense of peace that he hadn't known was possible. The event wrapped up, and people began to file out, the energy shifting to that of a warm goodbye. Marcus clapped Roger on the shoulder one last time before heading out. Roger lingered for a moment, taking in the empty hall. the echo of laughter still hanging in the air. This place had seen him at his lowest and had watched him rebuild himself, not just as a former guard or a man seeking redemption, but as someone who now understood what it meant to truly serve and protect. Roger stepped outside, the cool night air filling his lungs. The street was quiet, the city beyond humming with life. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next consequence, or facing the weight of regret. He was looking forward, ready for whatever came next, armed with lessons learned, relationships rebuilt, and the knowledge that redemption wasn't a final destination, but a continuous journey. And as he walked down the street, past the community center that had become his second home, Roger Simmons felt a sense of belonging that was not given by a uniform or a badge, but earned through the slow, hard work of change and the quiet acceptance of those he had once failed. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of redemption and community. If Roger's story inspired you or made you think, you won't want to miss our next story, where a once divided town comes together to face a common challenge, proving that hope and unity can rise from the most unexpected places. Click here to watch and continue exploring stories that reveal the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark meaningful conversations.